My friends, if you saw the title of today's visit in the news, it must have sounded terribly dull and boring, because as I gave it, it was the right to disagree. Now, that could very well bore anybody, and it sounds frightfully abstract, I can tell you. And yet, to me, there's something rather intriguing about it, and I thought I'd just spell out some thoughts on that subject a little and show you how it works and what its ultimate impact is on the country. This is really the age of controversy and disagreement. That's what the word means, to contend against, to refute, to differ, and to dispute. And you see it all along the line, particularly in legislative halls. So I tried to sum it up in my mind, and I thought, well, when all is said and done, what it amounts to is just the right to disagree with the other fellow. The right to disagree with any organization or institution that may be advancing some bill, some cause, some premise, but in a free country you can still disagree. One of the great expressions of Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of India, was that freedom connotes the right to err, meaning the right to make mistakes. And so in this whole context of freedom, there is this right to disagree. So let's look at a few of the implications and see how it spells out in a very practical way. Let's just assume the introduction of a bill, any bill, that relates to public policy, and to see what happens to it. First, of course, it's submitted, it's introduced. It could be by an individual. He could do it for an organization. It could be done by the administration, or it could be submitted by an agency of government. For instance, when I introduced a bill to readjust postal rates, I did it at the suggestion and request of the Postmaster General. But I know how controversial it really is. So when the bill is introduced, it goes through a committee. And if it's a matter of broad policy, the first thing they must do is to determine on a series of hearings. They must set down some dates when witnesses can appear. And then usually witnesses invite themselves. They write in or they telephone, and they want to be heard either for the bill or against the bill. So you see, disagreement begins at once. Then, of course, they may want some witnesses who are disinclined to come. And if the committee believes they can offer something of value, they're invited. Now, perhaps they will not come on invitation, and the committee may have to subpoena them. So you have a bill set down for hearings on certain dates, and you have a whole list of witnesses. And then they begin to testify. Those who favor the bill state their reasons, and those who are opposed to it state their reasons. Now, everything is embalmed, so to speak, is put down. You bring in the official reporters to record all the testimony that's taken in the committee room. And after a while, the testimony is printed, and when in printed form it becomes available, the committee members sit around the table and discuss the bill. And I've seen very few bills of major dimensions on which there hasn't been disagreement, and I could say sharp disagreement, because there is the right to disagree. So after these discussions, perhaps amendments will be offered, modifications and changes will be suggested, and then there'll be votes, usually record votes. And then when the majority has spoken, it becomes necessary to prepare the majority report in support of the bill. When that has been prepared, then it is submitted, and the minority, that is to say, those who oppose the bill and who have dissenting views, have a right to prepare their views and have them published in the same document, namely the committee report on the bill, along with majority views. Quite often you'll find individual views expressed, where an individual in the committee doesn't entirely agree with the majority or with the minority. And so the bill goes to the calendar, and at long last it may be motioned up for discussion on the Senate floor. And then what happens? First of all, the proponents of the bill, those who favor it, will begin stating their case. And betide and betimes, those who are opposed to it will state their case. And so the disagreement continues. Sometimes the disagreement manifests itself in different forms, in the form of amendments. An amendment in its very nature is disagreement with a bill, because if it's there and you've examined it and you disagree with all its provisions, you say, I want to change it. I want to modify it. That simply means you disagree with the content of the bill, and so you offer whatever amendments you desire. I think, for instance, of civil rights as a good example because it's so current. I believe 60 amendments at one time were pending on the desk. 60 different amendments to modify the so-called administration proposal which was before the Senate. So it means that at least 60 members, some of them I suppose duplicated, having more than one amendment, have by the very fact that they've offered an amendment expressed their disagreement with what is in the bill. And so disagreement continues back and forth. And at long last there must come a vote to dispose of the bill one way or the other. It could be tabled, it could be sent back to committee, or it could be passed either in its original form or in amended form. And when that has happened, we go through the same identical process virtually in the House of Representatives and vice versa if it is a bill that was first considered by the House. There are very few pieces of legislation where there are no disagreements between the two houses. And then what happens? The bill has to go to a conference committee. The members of the committee handling it in each case are usually appointed as conferees, and then they take the two bills and go off into a room on some appointed day and seek to adjust the differences, to adjust the controversy, to adjust the disagreement that has arisen. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes, depending on how much subject matter there is in the bill, it doesn't take very long. But I've seen a good many times when after 20 days the conferees couldn't agree at all on either version of the bill or a modification of it. And then they went back to their respective houses, the House and the Senate, to ask for instructions and have a majority tell them what they ought to do. But you see, the conference committee is in a sense a disagreement committee, where they try to harmonize these respective things and put it all together. But the disagreement don't stop there, you see. When at long last a conference report has been contrived, it has to go back to both branches of the Congress, and they have to vote on it once more. Now, if Senate or House disagrees with what their conferees have done, the disagreement starts all over again. But let's assume that they finally agreed on something, and the conference report is approved, then it goes to the White House. Now you get into an entirely different area of disagreement. The president. Maybe he doesn't agree with what both branches of the Congress have done. And after he bethinks the matter and asks his advisors about it, he may decide to veto the bill. Well, a veto is nothing else except disapproval. And when he sends it back, he says, in effect, in his message, I disagree with you, and therefore I do not approve what you've done. But the disagreement must go even further, because then the bill must go to the House where it started, and they can vote whether or not to override the president's veto or whether to sustain it. It would take, of course, 2/3 of those present to override the veto. And if it is sustained in the originating body, that's the end of it. But it's not quite the end of disagreement. For after all these disagreements in committee, on the floor of the House and Senate, in the conference committee, possibly with the president, there's still one more area of disagreement. Some citizen may decide that he's aggrieved by what the Congress and the president have done if the president should sign the bill. Then what does he do? He disagrees. And how does he disagree? He goes into court. And he said, look, my rights have been impugned. They've been impaired. I think this measure violates the Constitution. I disagree with what the Congress and the President did. And then he says, Mr. Judge, here's our case. And it goes through the whole judicial process, through the appeals process, finally lands in the Supreme Court. Maybe the court agrees with him, and maybe it doesn't. But quite frequently, the court disagrees with what both the President and the Congress have done. And they say, this statute is unconstitutional, or it goes too far, or it has invaded the rights of a citizen. So you see, here is disagreement at every turn of the road. And what a great thing it is that we do have the right to disagree. But in every case, the practical approach is that a majority must prevail, for if it were not for that, I suppose government would be a frustrating thing and very little could be accomplished. Now, time may not permit, but I think I could give you one example to make all this clear. There was a bill to provide $500 million over a period of 10 years as government share on a matching basis for stream pollution, and by that they meant grants of money out of the federal treasury to cities everywhere in the country to build sewage treatment plants so that streams would not be polluted. The House finally decided to change it. Instead of $500 million, they made it $1 billion for 10 years, $100 million a year. And at long last, they went through this whole disagreement process, worked their will, and sent the bill to the Senate. We had people who disagreed all along the line, and finally we changed the bill. Instead of $100 million for 10 years, we made it $80 million for 10 years. We disagreed with them. The bill went to a conference committee. The conference committee didn't agree with either the House or Senate. Instead of $100 million for 10 years, or $80 million for 10 years, the conference committee made it $90 million for 10 years. And in that form, the bill went to the President. He didn't agree with anybody, and he vetoed the bill. So he came back, and the House sustained the veto, and that was the end of it. Unless somebody introduces a new bill that probably meets some of the objections that have been raised. Now you say, this is terrible. No, my friends, it isn't. It's the fact that we have the right to disagree without fear, without anxiety, that makes this the country that it is and gives vitality to government. It's a great tribute to the fact that we can do it. We can fight and feud and fuss, sometimes become frustrated and provoked, sometimes show a little temper or a little passion about it, but always and always it subsides, because the right to disagree is one of the great rights that we enjoy in this country. If it were not so, then government was simple. Then all we needed was one man. Let him do everything. Let him make the laws. Let him execute them. Let him interpret the laws. And then, of course, we'd have a despotism. But it's the fact that people are elected, and they disagree sometimes violently, one with another, that we go through this whole process, and it's still vital and it's still effective. And so it goes back to this one thing. I've often said government is like an old waterlogged scow. Don't move very fast, doesn't move very far at one time, but it never sinks. And because the right to disagree is here, we still have a great free government. It's good to visit with you.